Out there waits a giant of iron, 20 tubes aimed at the horizon, 20 chances to turn a map into ashes. Its name is Uragana. Hurricane, the storm. Russia trusts to shatter defenses. But storms are no longer certain things. A few kilometers away, 3 soldiers crouch in a dim room, faces lit by the pale glow of monitors. Their hands move not over rifles, but over controllers, delicate as musicians tuning an instrument. On the table rest 3 small frames of carbon and wire, fragile as toys, each holding the promise of a thunderbolt. For them, this is not invention, it is survival. So begins a new grammar of war. Steel against silicon, weight against wit. For the price of a month's wage, a single drone may unmake a monster. And if that is true, what else might be rewritten? The balance of fear, the very law of power itself. Subscribe, stay with us, and witness this transformation. Not merely another story from the front, but a glimpse into the rebirth of warfare where courage, calculation, and conscience converge upon a flicker of light in the dark. The wind slid through the cracked windows of a warehouse on the Eastern Railway. Inside, the Phoenix FPV team worked by the light of a single lamp that swung in the draft. A table of tools, cables, and coffee tins became their battlefield. 3 drones, carbon-framed and no larger than a seagull, waited in silence. Each carried a shaped charge no heavier than a loaf of bread, yet powerful enough to pierce steel. Beyond the walls, somewhere in the night, 20 tons of armor rumbled. The Russian BM-27 Uragan, pride of the artillery corps, was being refueled. The pilot, a man whose call sign was Hawk, breathed slowly. His gloves trembled as he adjusted the headset. "Signal clear," whispered Leah, the observer. "Target confirmed is a fuel truck beside launcher." The crew exchanged a nod that felt like a farewell. They had watched the Uragan strike before, whole streets erased in minutes. Tonight, they would try to stop it with tools built in a garage. Outside, the drones rose into the mist. Their tiny rotors cut the air with an insect whine. Skimming treetops, they weaved between pylons, staying beneath radar fences. On the monitor, the view juddered. Our black wires, cold moonlight, then a flash of torchlight from a Russian patrol. Hawk's pulse spiked. He rolled the stick, sliding the drone under a power line. The patrol passed. No alarm. At 2 kilometers, the first layer of defense appeared, mirrored panels and flares designed to blind cameras. The drone sensors burned white. Hawk switched to manual sight, guiding by the faint outline of the launcher's shadow. Static crawled across the feed as Russian jammers screamed on the spectrum. GPS vanished, so telemetry froze. For other teams, this was failure. For Phoenix, it was instinct. They flew by eye, muscle, and breath. Then, through the snow of interference, the monster appeared, a mass of tubes angled at the sky, its crew opening lids preparing to fire. "Now," Leah said softly. Hawk pushed forward. Hawk pushed forward. The drone pitched down, accelerating, the image blurring into streaks of orange. Impact! A brief flash, then silence before the world erupted. The refueling truck ignited, a column of fire twisting upward. Launch tubes tore free, spinning like spears. Shockwaves rolled across the valley. The second drone followed, diving into the inferno to finish the kill. Within seconds, the pride of Russian artillery became a pyre of shattered steel. In the warehouse, no one cheered. Only the hiss of static and the smell of burnt circuits. Hawk removed his headset and stared at the dark screen. For $3,000, he thought, they had erased 3 million. Yet in that arithmetic lay no triumph, only the quiet understanding that tomorrow the equation would repeat. And somewhere in the night, these modern military equipment waited for their next lesson in humility. The secret of the Phoenix unit lay not in technology alone, but in patience and nerve. Their weapons were simple: carbon frames, improvised batteries, and off-the-shelf cameras. What transformed them into killers was the discipline of the pilots. Each mission began with silence, a full minute of breath control before ignition. In those 60 seconds they memorized the map, the distance, the crosswinds, and every tower that could slice a signal in half. When the drones lifted, they carried no autopilot beyond the human hand. GPS was a luxury often denied. Russian jammers blanketed the air with white noise, bending coordinates until north became nowhere. So Phoenix trained for blindness. They learned to fly by textures, the shimmer of leaves, the angle of shadows, the pulse of light on metal. When interference came, their eyes replaced telemetry, their instincts replaced algorithms. The enemy fought back with every layer of deception. Reflective shields flashed under searchlights, confusing cameras. Flares and chaff distorted contrast. Entire perimeters glowed with infrared traps to lure automatic guidance into error. Yet, Phoenix had already abandoned automation. They trusted reflex more than code. On screens across the front, analysts called it manual dominance, the ability to override every failure through human precision. The pilots call it something simpler, flying by soul. It meant holding the line between chaos and control, between fear and focus. Every engagement followed the same rhythm. Launch low, stay beneath radar, zigzag under power cables, cut across wind corridors, and descend in a final vertical dive. Time to target, under 2 minutes. The window for success, 3 seconds. If missed, the drone was lost. If struck, the pilot would see the explosion before feeling his own relief. In military terms, it was asymmetry refined to art. The Uragan, the Buch, the T-90, each a masterpiece of engineering and bureaucracy, could not adapt in seconds. The drones could. These small craft rewrote the doctrine of engagement, agility over armor, nerve over numbers. And behind every flight sat the same unspoken truth, that war was becoming intimate again. No distant artillery officer, no faceless missile operator, only a pair of eyes locked on a trembling screen, guiding a spark through storm and smoke. How? That is how the small defeat the mighty owl. Not with new machines, but with the old courage to improvise. A single strike does not only break metal, it bends narratives. When the Uragan burned, the blast was audible for miles, but its echo traveled farther still, into command rooms, barracks, and living rooms where doctrine is taught and faith is kept. Armies survive on belief, as much as on logistics. Belief in a system, belief in a shield, belief that a certain posture will protect men and towns. That belief is fragile. On the Ukrainian side, the sight of a cheap drone turning a launcher into scrap translated into a new currency, confidence. Men who had watched shells flatten villages found new reasons to hope. They celebrated quietly, not for spectacle but for survival. The pilots received slaps on the back. The controllers received tea. In an age where footage spreads faster than orders, a video of a successful mission becomes a force multiplier. It persuades allies, unnerves adversaries, and invites donors to invest in what demonstrably works. For the Russian formations, the effect was corrosive. An Uragan on the rails was an icon of massed firepower. Its destruction punctured the narrative of invincibility. Commanders, seeing their high-value systems delayed, dispersed, or withdrawn, must rewrite tactics overnight. The simple act of moving launches deeper into rear areas costs time, fuel, and the most precious of all resources, initiative. That is the operational victory the transcript hints at. Not merely loss of equipment, but loss of tempo. Doctrinally, the field is reordering. Traditional models that rely on concentration of centralized fire must now contend with pervasive sensors and cheap effects. Defense planners speak in layers: camouflage, mobility, electronic warfare, and redundancy. Yet each layer is a new cost and a new complexity. Adaptation is possible, but slow. While hardware can be replaced in months, trust is harder to rebuild. Finally, there is the information front. Images and narration shape perception. A single clip of a drone strike feeds strategic narratives, ingenuity versus arrogance, agility versus mass. Those narratives influence funding, policy, and public will. War is fought in the field and on screens. Today, the latter often decides the former. The ripple from one small strike reaches until doctrine itself is tested and sometimes rewritten. The night after the Uragan's destruction, the war exhaled again. The forest north of Chernihiv lay motionless under mist. Only the faint whine of a generator marked human presence. Beneath the trees stretched a Ukrainian S-300 battery, a fire control radar on its tall mast, command vehicle parked beneath it, launchers fanned out like cautious animals. It was one link in the shield that protected Kiev's sky skis, an inheritance from Soviet times, patient and powerful, yet old enough to carry its own ghosts. At 20 past midnight, an operator spotted a trace on the screen, a dot that flickered and vanished. Moments later, static hissed. The dot was no longer a mystery. It was a visitor moving at hypersonic speed, the Iskander M, Russia's precision hammer, released hundreds of kilometers away. For a heartbeat, the horizon seemed to split, then the roar arrived. At a kilometer's height, the missile shed its skin. 50 bomblets scattered, each no larger than a football, each engineered to detonate meters above the ground. The forest bloomed with explosions. Metal shrieked as fragments sliced through launches, trucks, and men. The 30N6 radar toppled, its mast folding like wet paper. In seconds, the command cabin was engulfed. Those who ran carried fire on their backs. Those who stayed disappeared into smoke. From a distance, the impact seemed surgical. From the ground, it was chaos. Trees stripped bare, vehicles overturned, shrapnel raining until every motion ceased. The missile had done what it was designed to do: erase an air defense node, remind adversaries that the empire of heavy fire had not yet fallen. For the Russians, the strike restored rhythm. Their doctrine of shock and depth demanded demonstrations of reach to prove that, despite drones, data, and improvisation, the old language of force still spoke fluently. The Iskander M delivered that sentence with authority. Commanders called it the air defense killer, a term both proud and haunted. Each launch was costly, yet each success reaffirmed an identity. That power could still travel faster than response. For Ukraine, the loss was more than equipment. It meant a gap in the sky, a vulnerability in morale. Rescue teams worked under falling debris, dragging half-burnt cables, coughing through soot. When dawn came, the site was a mosaic of ruin. Twisted barrels, cracked screens, a single radar dish leaning against a tree as if bowing. Above it all, the sky remained the same indifferent gray. Reports the next day listed the destroyed vehicles, the lost radar, the killed crewmen, but the true message lay in the contrast. The previous night, a cheap drone had undone a giant. This night, an expensive missile reasserted terror. Balance had not been restored. Only the pendulum swung back. And in that swing, each side saw both its pride and its peril reflected in the flames. The Iskander M is not merely a missile. It is a philosophy of precision through velocity. A solid fuel engine drives it to nearly 7 times the speed of sound. Its body performs violent evasive maneuvers during descent, twisting unpredictably to defeat interception. At the chosen altitude, the warhead splits, releasing submunitions that burst above ground level, shredding everything in a radius wider than a city square. Its guidance fuses inertial, optical, and satellite correction, giving the weapon an accuracy once reserved for science fiction. The objective is surgical annihilation. Eliminate a single radar, a convoy, or a defensive knot before response can form. Facing it, the S-3OPS represents an older logic. Layer the sky with radars and interceptors. Build protection through geometry. Each battery consists of a command vehicle, a tall mast radar, and up to a dozen launchers. The 30N6 radar peers hundreds of kilometers, guiding missiles capable of striking aircraft and cruise threats at 70 kilometers distance. But its architecture demands proximity. The radar must stand high, its transmitters exposed, launchers and supply trucks must cluster nearby. That concentration, once a virtue, is now a flaw. In the encounter near Chernihiv, the Iskander exploited precisely that flaw. By detonating in the air, its bomblets rained death upon every component simultaneously: the radar mast, the command post, the ammunition truck. Dispersion would have saved some, but doctrine kept them close for coordination. Electronic camouflage mattered little. At hypersonic speed, detection and impact were divided by seconds. The lesson is not technological alone. It is architectural. Defense built for eras of slower missiles must now evolve or disintegrate. The S-300 remains noble but vulnerable, an echo of a time when altitude equaled safety. The Iskander speaks for the present, where altitude only prolongs exposure. Dawn came cold and precise. In a small hide beneath the canopy of Kursk forest, a scout team watched through lenses the slow choreography of men and machines. The guns they had found were not new marvels but practical workhorses, Coxswain systems, heavy gun carriages with long barrels hauled into position beneath nets and tarpaulins. Their crews moved with the hurried competence of soldiers who believed in the simple arithmetic of volume. More tubes, more tonnage, more reach. It had been a doctrine that worked where the sky belonged to the defender. The reconnaissance was the quiet beginning. Like a UAVs idled on thermal currents above the trees, feeds flicking at regular intervals into encrypted consoles. The drone images were small things, sound-gridded clearings, 3 barrels aligned like the teeth of a comb, men bent to loading. Yet those small pixels were decisive, coordinates fixed, wind and humidity logged, likely ammunition stowage noted. The kill chain closed in minutes. From a launcher, hidden like any other lorry, the M42 high-mobility artillery rocket system shrugged its pod open. The Kruachow, part of an artillery brigade schooled in Speeder, ran the checks that make the modern battlefield: surgical, frequency-hopping comms, last-second satellite corrections, and a launch arc calculated to avoid known interceptor corridors. The munition chosen was not a brute fragmenting shell, but a specialist, the M30A1 GMLRS, its warhead filled with pre-formed tungsten ball shots designed to bloom above the ground. Launch is a small theater. The rocket climbs in a bright whisper, a streak that eats distance. Guidance updates from the Leica feed refine its flight. A human operator watches a cursor jog into place. At apogee, the warhead opens, releasing a cloud of tungsten that falls at supersonic speed. Over 100 meters, the forest becomes a hammered field of metal. The first detonation hit an ammunition truck, which answered with a secondary fireball that doubled the damage. One of the Coxswain carriages was shredded at the breach. The second was toppled as its elevation mechanism snapped. Men were flung into the leaf litter or taken by shrapnel before they could understand what had happened. In the span of a single 90-second window, 3 guns, their support vehicles, and the people who staffed them ceased to exist as an operational threat. Survivors crawled, bleeding and shocked, while command in the rear first thought of technical failure and then of the kill chain: find, fix, strike, scoot. The last element is crucialer. Himar's crews vanish before the enemy can return fire. By the time reconnaissance teams and reaction forces from the Russian side reached the clearing, the launchers had already shifted position, leaving nothing but smoke and the distant sound of engines. The cost calculus is cruelly simple. The rockets fired were worth a few $100,000 at most, the Mat Oriel destroyed, and the operational pause imposed ran into multiples of millions. More than that, the strike revealed a doctrinal problem. Weapons designed to mass in the rear, unsupported by layered air defense or rapid dispersion, become inviting targets when data links and precision fires align. These modern military equipment, when networked, ages UAVs, satellite corrections, and responsive rockets, form a kill chain that makes geography irrelevant and speed absolute. Kursk burned for 90 seconds. The aftermath reshaped deployments and policy. Commanders in the theater recalculated, suppliers took note, and an entire doctrine reliant on massed, unshielded artillery was forced to find new shelter or face the same fate. Across the months that framed these battles, a pattern began to show itself. It was no longer a contest of armies but of processes. Find, fix, strike, skutau, the new grammar of destruction. At its heart lay the marriage between observation and response, where a signal caught by a small UAV could translate into the removal of an entire battery minutes later. Speed became both weapon and shield. Those who controlled tempo controlled consequence. Ukraine's victories revealed the strength of decentralization. Each small team, Phoenix with their drones, the artillerymen with their Himasau, operated as a self-contained node. Autonomy replaced hierarchy. By contrast, systems built for central command struggled to adapt. An Uragan or S-300 cannot hide, cannot improvise, it obeys doctrine and thus becomes predictable. In military science, the term is asymmetric efficiency. Yet, on the ground, it feels like unfairness. 9-9, one side learning to think faster than the other can react. But within that efficiency lies unease. The cleaner the process, the more invisible the pain. The footage that fascinates analysts. The perfect impact, the white plume rising in silence rarely shows what happens 10 seconds later. The cries, the burnt air, the hollowing of men who realize they are not gods but instruments. War has become so sharp that we risk mistaking precision for morality. Still, there are moments when the silence after a strike tells a different truth. In that quiet sits exhaustion, not triumph. The pilots of Phoenix did not cheer. The artillerymen in Kursk did not gloat. Each knew that every success only sets the next target, that ingenuity is both salvation and curse. This is the paradox of the modern battlefield. To survive, you must innovate. To innovate, you must detach. And in detachment, something deeply human begins to erode. Strategy gains clarity as conscience grows clouded. It is here, between effectiveness and empathy, that the future of warfare will either evolve or lose its soul entirely. The smoke above Kursk did not rise alone. It joined the ash of Chernihiv and the cold embers of the railway line where the Uragan had burned. 3 scenes, 3 moments, yet one message. The battlefield has changed beyond recall. No frontier is safe, no weapon eternal. Speed, data, and nerve have eclipsed mass and ritual. The art of war is no longer about who holds the ground, but who holds the connection. Looking forward, the line between machine and man grows thin. Algorithms whisper into helmets, satellites feed orders faster than thought. Armies no longer march, they compute. For planners and politicians, it is progress. For those inside the fire, it is something colder, the slow disappearance of the human scale. When drones make decisions quicker than hearts can beat, how long before the soul of command becomes obsolete? Yet amid that uncertainty lies a constant. Behind every circuit board stands a person, and behind every target there is a pulse. The pilots of Phoenix, the operators of HIMARS, the crews who watched the Iskander fall, all carry the same burden, to be precise, and still remember compassion. They inhabit a paradox, where mercy and accuracy share the same trigger. Military equipment is not merely steel and code, it is the shape of our intent. Military equipment is the echo of our fears, the currency of our ambitions. Military equipment tells the truth. We rarely admit that we measure safety not by peace achieved, but by fire controlled. The cost may no longer be counted in tons of shells, but in fragments of trust. As the world races toward faster, smaller, cleverer tools of war, the question remains, can our ethics evolve at the same speed as our weapons? Each generation must decide anew whether technology serves humanity or supplants it. The future will not be written by the loudest strike, but by the quiet hands that choose restraint. Until that day, the sky will continue to burn with the lessons of those who dared to test its limits, and the hope that somewhere beneath the noise, humanity still remembers why it fights at all. Darkness sits upon a railway somewhere in the east. The sound is not of engines, but of breathing. Ink, slow, uncertain, human.